Folks, welcome again to the next chapter, chapter 3 of my weekly podcast called Chronicles of a Small Business Owner. For those that don't know me, my name is Bruce, and what I do is I work closely with business owners, CEOs, and entrepreneurs to either help them do three things: scale up, start up, or fix up their businesses. This podcast series focuses on interactions that I've had with business owners I'm working with or have previously worked with, the discussions we've had and continue to have, and the lessons learned and solutions successfully implemented in their respective companies. For those that heard my previous podcast, Chapter 2, I spoke about my interactions with a business owner who was absolutely overwhelmed. We called him Rob. He had a painting business, still has the painting business, but absolutely paralyzed himself and left without a focused execution plan with everything that he perceived he had to do on a day-to-day basis. His business needed this stuff. He couldn't deliver. Well, this week's interaction is with a business owner that I have worked with for approximately 6 to 7 months. The business owner is a construction business that has gone on pretty well over the last couple of years, but now needs to scale. The business owner, Julia, wanted me to help her scale up a business, but do it efficiently to make significant and sustain significant profit moving forward. She had an awesome year, I will say that, and this was in the midst of COVID. Financially, her business had absolutely rocked. Julia actually commented to me, which now that I think about it in hindsight, I should have paid more attention to, that this year, the year 2020, had cleared her, quote, of all the sins. Now she was in a positive cash position and was time for her to start correctly investing in a business again. Well, this investment included my services and said that she needed to spend money if she wanted to make money. I'm sure many of you have heard of that one. Absolutely true in certain cases, but not all the time. As I record this podcast, it's been a couple of months now into 2021, and please excuse my language, the proverbial shit has hit the fan with Julia. The so-called investments that she'd made, including my services, moving into a new market, adding a new line of business, purchasing additional office space. I'm serious, right? The result was that Julia and the company's cash cushion, an overall optimism that drove this behavior, had ended abruptly. Very sad. The investments that Julia made were well intended, don't get me wrong, but her timing and overly optimistic state of mind didn't help her at all. It crushed her, regardless of my continuous warnings to her. The warnings are difficult to hear or listen to at the time. Optimism is fabulous, but over-optimism and jumping into it without focus can be a killer. This is what Julia experienced. Her marketing efforts that she invested in were reactive and very narrowly defined. When you're in a hurry and you're driven by optimism, reactivity and narrow thinking is pretty typical. So what happened? Well, she underestimated the significance that had to be placed in a robust marketing action plan. The market only came to know Julia and the business when she and the company were out of cash and unfortunately in crisis. Now, if you think about it, one of the components of a great marketing plan is the message you want to send. If you're in a crisis, if you're panicking or worried, stressed about your business, your message is affected just as much. Number 2, the second line of business that she bought or invested in also came to a screeching halt. The individual that she purchased the company from reassured her that the brand was strong and that the market already existed. There wasn't much Julia had to be done. All she needed to do was continue with what had already been completed. Well, in Julia's state of mind, she took their word and really didn't do her due diligence. Big problems. Number 3, Julia has now realized that the single reason she asked me to help her, which had been really to scale up the business, had been neglected, and now had to start from scratch again. Now, I was working in the back end once this was all going on. The silver lining in the cloud was that there was quite a bit of stuff that had already been done. It'd been a tremendous help for Julia when she got back on track again over the last several weeks. But it didn't have to happen, folks. And like I spoke about behaviors that we're unconscious about in my last week's podcast, we've got to be careful. Optimism is great. Optimism is fantastic. But really channel this in ways that can be productive for you. I want to stress to everybody on this podcast, it doesn't have to happen to you. So please take note. Why did this happen to someone like Julia? I mean, think about it. Her business was going great. She'd done everything she needed to do until optimism, which is typically something we all love and drives us, became her worst enemy. There was no cause for alarm because she and her business had the best year ever, had built up an impressive cash cushion, lots of cash. If this was the case, surely this meant that she knew what she was doing. She'd also built up the business steadily over the last few years. The problem was the danger and risk, as I said, that's associated with a peace of mind or a place of comfort that Julia had created for herself. It sounds great, but not managed correctly can be absolutely catastrophic. Like many, this reduced her sense of urgency and importance. For those that checked out my last podcast or listened to my last recording, we spoke about the difference between importance and urgency and how to utilize that component to make your business effective. Her initial need to scale her existing business established a foundation, or I should say, establish a foundation for initial growth or ongoing growth. But Julia, like many of us, was caught unaware by this unconscious human bias called the Parkinson's effect. The Parkinson's effect, for those, and I encourage you to look it up, is the usage expands as availability or supply provided to us is made available. In this case, Julia, having more cash available, provided a long-awaited sense of comfort and subsequent release. This created a sense of confidence in utilizing the scarce resource, in this case cash, and also time, that without thought had long-term implications. As soon as the supply, in this case cash, is limited or runs out, and someone is in crisis, only then, like in Julia's case, makes an extreme sense of importance and urgency become a priority in their lives. It starts to surface. In Julia's case, well, luckily she was okay. Human beings, business owners included, typically overestimate our chances of success. And by the end of the day, we need to learn what they fell in love with. They fall completely out of love with the actions and execution and stuff that they were expecting. In many cases, we're dazzled by the thought of that end success, and very little of any thought is placed in the actual actions required to achieve successful end results. The sense of over-optimism tends to create a blind spot for us in our ability to plan and execute effectively. Only after failure is imminent or has occurred, we then tend to look for an external reason for our failure or failures, versus the tendency to be willfully blind in many respects at times. Of course, Julia and I made up for lost time, thank goodness, but to get Julia back on track was difficult. Going through that process, feeling like you failed, feeling like I should have seen that, I should have done something different, I should have done something more, is not what you should be doing. I want to share 2 techniques that we use to ensure Julia's success moving forward with her business. To ensure Julia reduced the chance of being misdirected by the Parkinson's effect again, I introduced and helped Julia implement a profit-first system, which provides a solid way to allocate cash to the right parts of the business system. I said to Julia that she adopted this system and continued to generate revenue like she had done before, and she now has continued to start doing. Using the system would guarantee her profitability and eliminate her debt that she'd accumulated as a result of bad behavior or bad decision making. Julia's response was priceless, and this never gets old. More so because of the look on her face when I said this and her reluctant response saying, "Bruce, no one can guarantee that they can help us eliminate debt or make profit. To no surprise, Julia's cash situation had improved tremendously in her business. She sees her profit finally being there, reducing her debt, paying herself for the first time in over 6 months, and doing it regularly. For those that heard me last time around in my recording, I spoke about sales minus expenses equals profit. Profit first, sales minus profit equals expenses. For more information, please go check out Mike McKellarwood's book, Profit First. The last technique was a planning technique, which included the investment in other business ventures that we spoke about as well. When we plan, it's not to say that you should plan with a negative mindset, but plan with worst case scenario in mind. Julia, when I said this to her, said to me, well, it didn't make sense. She wanted to be positive in her approach to planning for her business's growth. I responded to her by saying that there was nothing wrong, and I say this to you folks as well, there's nothing wrong with thinking positively and leveraging hers and the company's strengths in the planning process. The problem is that optimism and excitement tends to blind us by putting us in a position where we overestimate our successful or positive outcome. I added to this by reminding Julia that her strengths can become her weaknesses and even irrelevant as the business starts to grow and continues to grow. Planning for worst case scenario puts the business owner and the company's existing, I like to call it operating template, under some stress, like a stress test. It ensures that any potential weaknesses or shortfalls in the business's system, operating routine, or whatever is in place are identified and are strengthened, rather than finding this out at the end. Now, the good news, since using this approach with Julia, the systems and structures we started working on initially are now scrutinized, implemented successfully. Yes, do I want to come across as saying these are the be-all and end-all systems? For sure. Are they? Not all the time. It's important to put them under that stress test. Folks, for more information and the process that Julia went through to go through this process to make this transition happen, please feel free. Send me an email at info@4workplaces.com, as you can see on the screen, where, as always, happy to send you a copy of the tool, video tutorial, and the process that I went through with Julia that you can also follow. I hope you found this information helpful. Look forward to seeing you again next week for Chapter 4 in our series called Chronicles of a Small Business Owner. Thank you.